What are the main objectives of the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, the organization that you represent, and how does it help fight racism and intolerance in areas such as sports?
Well, ECRI, the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, is an independent human rights body specialized in monitoring racism and intolerance across Europe. So from Portugal to Azerbaijan and from Iceland to Turkey. It was established 30 years ago. And it is composed of 46 independent experts from each of the member states of the Council. So ECRI does country monitoring work. So what does it mean? It regularly goes to each European country, including Spain, to see how the situation actually is. It reports about it. It covers racism, discrimination, intolerance in all areas of life. So not only sports, but also education, employment, housing, healthcare. And since 2013, it also looks into homophobia and transphobia. It makes recommendations addressed to governments. And these recommendations can take the form of general policy recommendations, in other words, ECRI standards, like General Policy Recommendation number 12 on combating racism and racial discrimination in the field of sport, or country-specific recommendations in response to particular problems identified during country visits. It helps by raising the alarm whenever there is a problem, but also by guiding, as an independent body, government action against racism and intolerance.
Well-known campaigns in sports against racism. If you had to choose a few recommendations for fighting against hate speech, which one would you highlight and why?
Well, there are two general policy recommendations that are highly relevant in the field of sport. It is General Policy Recommendation number 12, as I mentioned before, and General Policy Recommendation number 15 on combating hate speech. As you said, there are well-known large-scale anti-racism campaigns in football in particular. And they have been organized, coordinated, or encouraged or supported by governments, sports clubs, and federations. This has been one key ECRI recommendation for many years, so I think it's an important one. And these campaigns have been quite successful, because I think we speak more about racism in sports now than we did 30 years ago, and I think this is linked to these campaigns. Another key recommendation is perhaps about the role of referees in preventing and combating racism. They should be invited to react appropriately when athletes, technical staff, or supporters engage in racist gestures or expressions. These referees should take action, including by interrupting or stopping the sports, even whenever necessary. And they should also report about these racist incidents. Maybe one other major recommendation is about inviting sports federations and sports clubs to adopt diversity and equal opportunity policies in order to ensure that there is a balanced representation of minority groups in sports at all levels. And I would say at all levels it's very important, because it's not only about players, it's also about managers in football federations, for example, and European structures.
Instances like the wars in Syria and in Ukraine, with a lot of refugees, led to clear difference in the way Europeans have treated them. In which ways do you perceive difference in the treatment of refugees based on their countries of origin?
Yes, it's indeed hard not to remember the quite different approach taken by many European states towards families fleeing Syria and the war in Syria, when compared to the huge solidarity that we could see towards Ukrainians. And of course, it's hard to criticize. It's wonderful that we could see such solidarity towards Ukrainians, but in the view of ECRI, there should not be such a difference. ECRI say that the solidarity shown towards Ukrainians should be the new normal vis-à-vis all people in need of protection and assistance irrespective of ethnic or national origin, religion, skin color, citizenship, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And that's really important. It's that let's use the solidarity we see with the Ukrainians to make it the new normal, the new norm for the management of current and future humanitarian crises.
From your experience, do you think that in general the situation has improved or worsened in recent times?
I would say it's difficult to say it has improved or worsened because we speak more about racism. How to interpret that? Does it mean that there is more racism, or does it mean that we are more aware about racism and that racism is more visible, that we are more sensitive and we react to it? So I guess there are some worrying trends I see, especially from politicians, where in the past you had racist police discourse from extremists. Now it's increasingly more mainstream politicians, and this is probably worrying. But at the same time, I think there is in society more awareness about racism, and I think this is an improvement. So I think on one side there is improvement, but there is also a worsening in the public discourse in particular, as we can see during election campaigns, for example.
Are there cases of race discrimination, racist insults, and attacks on athletes more frequently in any specific sports? And if so, why does this happen?
Well, I think most incidents, racist incidents reported to ECRI are in football and maybe more generally collective sports, such as handball in a few cases. And those targeted are often players of African descent, black players. It's perhaps that the racist incidents in football are more visible than in other sports because football is one of the most popular sports, if not the most popular in Europe and the world. So that may be one explanation. Another one is that there is probably more monitoring of racist incidents in football in partnership with civil society organizations. I remember in the early 2000s, UEFA and the Football Against Racism in Europe Fair had a partnership about racist incidents. So if you have mechanisms to scrutinize and monitor racist incidents, it becomes more visible. So it may give this impression that actually there is a bigger issue in football, which may not be the case. But there is also one other possible explanation is that there are possibly more issues with football fans during football matches or outside. It goes from so-called monkey chants during football match to the physical assault and beating of people of African descent. But that can be also outside the sports event. But it's true that all what came to us, it would mainly about football. There were a few cases about handball or hockey, but football was probably the one where we got most incidents.
Many athletes are role models for young people, but their attitudes are not always exemplary on the issue of racism. What do you think are the measures that should be adopted in this regard?
Well, you're right. Athletes are indeed role models for the youth, and they must understand that they are role models at all times, in all circumstances. What they say and what they do matter a lot. And it can be in public, but also in private, because sometimes what they say in private can become public at some point. I remember last year there was a video circulating showing a French football player mocking Japanese staff, helping them. And he apologized later when this video was circulated. It was during he apologized, but it's not sufficient. Sports clubs and federations should use disciplinary measures. And I think also sponsors and the advertising industry should be encouraged to be more careful about the picture they convey when players they sponsor display racist attitudes and behaviors.
It is frequently said that we should extract lessons from the past and educate in the present and for the future. What recommendation would you make to educational institutions, for example, our secondary school, so as to train tolerant and respectful people in spheres like sports?
Yeah, I think it's a very important point that you raise. ECRI has for many years emphasized the need for adopting comprehensive legislation, anti-discrimination legislation. The law is one thing, but to change future mindsets, school education is, I think, the key. It is really the duty of the school to ensure inclusive education, to help pupils and students to spot racism and discriminatory attitudes and behavior, and to report and to react about. It's not only about respect and tolerance towards pupils and students of different origin, for example. It's about committing to effective equality for all. When you do sports in school, it's probably a very important channel to build the future society you want to live in future.
The first point of the recommendation number 12 on combating racism and racial discrimination in the field of sport refers to equal opportunities in access to sports for all. However, becoming a member, even of an amateur sports club, is usually very expensive, paying the inscription, buying clothes. How can federations or local authorities favor that young boys and girls could have access to these sports organizations when they come from minority groups, backgrounds without economic possibilities?
But I think that the key issue is really that there should be some proactive measures from the local authorities, from the stations, to help whatever format the low-income families, especially from those with from low-income and minority backgrounds.
Doing sports and becoming a member of a club can be a great opportunity for the integration of young people from minority groups in a given community. Shouldn't local authorities be more active in this sense, helping children from minority groups to practice sports and to enter local sports clubs?
Yeah, it's absolutely true that sports are seen as one effective means of achieving that integration.
Is there any evidence about the racial discrimination and racism suffered by women in comparison with men in the world of sports?
That said, it's true that it's not sufficient. We are cooperating with other sectors of the Council of Europe, the sports sector.
Is there any sort of supervision system that guarantees that such an interesting and necessary document as the recommendation number 12 is implemented, or at least known by sports federations and clubs?
That said, it's true that it's not sufficient. We are cooperating with other sectors of the Council of Europe, the sports sector.
Taking into account your experience, what are the main differences among the countries belonging to ECRI with regard to their degree of commitment when fighting against racial discrimination?
When a country adopts regular strategies or action plans against racism, it is a good indication that there is a strong commitment.
What is the degree of impact education has on the prevention of racism and intolerance?
Oh, it's huge. Education is a key factor. As I said before, this is where actually the fight should start. It's an education. The more you are able in school to identify what racism is, the more you talk about it, the more you know how to fight against it in school, the better it is for the future of our societies.
What are the greatest difficulties in achieving your goals, and how do you see the future of fighting racism and inequality in Europe?
Perhaps the first challenge is to accept that combating racism and racial discrimination is a very long, it's not a never-ending battle.
Through which mediums do you spread your actions?
So we use all channels possible and all media possible to make our messages better known and implemented.
In the future, do you think racism will be reduced?
I would hope to. I would hope to. Unfortunately, I tend to think that racism is a disease, and it's there is no vaccine. There is no vaccine against racism. So I'm afraid it's a constant fight. It's our objective to reduce it to the minimum possible, even to eradicate it. But I'm not sure we will succeed. When I see a number of reactions, and especially when I hear some politicians during electoral campaigns, for example. So, but it should be our objectives to reduce it and eliminate it.